There were serious errors in judgment. I've never seen anything like this. That's the words of Queensland's Child Safety Minister Shannon Fentiman yesterday after an investigation into the tragic death of Caboolture toddler Mason Jet Lee showed serious problems with the system. Shannon Fentiman has joined me in the studio. She's Queensland's Minister for Child Safety. Minister, good morning to you.
Morning, Steve.
When you say you've never seen anything like this, what are you saying?
Well, as I said on Tuesday, I received the first stage of this review into my department's interactions with Mason Jet Lee and his family. And I was deeply concerned and angered by some of the findings in this report. It did detail serious errors of judgment, as you've said, and breaches of legislation, codes of practice and procedures in this case. And as a result, we have referred 12 child safety staff to the Ethical Standards Unit. 3 staff have been stood down effective immediately.
On full pay?
On full pay.
Why?
That's the usual practice while an ethical standards investigation is conducted. Staff are afforded natural justice and procedural fairness to be able to put their case. But for 3 of those staff, the allegations were serious enough for them to be stood down effective immediately.
The union rejects that. They say that you're trying to shift the blame onto these poor workers, that it's a problem in the department, your department.
Alex Scott said yesterday that he won't stand by while staff are scapegoated. I have to say, I completely agree with him. But he did
don't scapegoat them.
Well, he did also go on to say if staff have done the wrong thing, they need to be held accountable. I won't make any apologies when information comes before me that warrants immediate attention to refer staff who have made serious errors of judgment to the Ethical Standards Unit. Now, the Ethical Standards Unit will do a thorough investigation and determine whether or not codes of conduct have been breached.
What were the ethical failings of the 12 staff? You must have had prima facie evidence of some sort. What were the ethical failings of them?
Well, as I've said, the report details serious errors of judgment, breaches of legislation, breaches of codes of conduct, standards of practice. Those standards of practice are put in place to protect kids, and in this case, they were not followed.
And if they had have, would Mason Jet Lee be alive?
Well, that's really a decision for the Office of the State Coroner. You know, the Family and Child Commissioner is also looking at this case. And I have to say, Steve, this is just the first stage of the review. This report is now being considered by an expert child death review panel. And I have committed to releasing the final report in January, which is unprecedented. These reports are never usually released, but I understand how saddened and shocked the community has been by this appalling, tragic case. And I want to make sure we are incredibly transparent and accountable. And that's why I have said I will release the final report.
Why not release the one before that, the internal report? Why not restore public confidence, the one you say you only got on Tuesday, and actually release it to the public now?
Because this report now has to be considered by a panel of experts, and it also now has to be considered by the Family and Child Commission in their report. So I'm not going to...
But the internal report's not going to change the facts that Mason Jet Lee is dead. Given the public disquiet around this case,
No.
Why not release the internal report so that all the professionals who work in the industry can read through it and say, look, something's consistently going wrong in our system?
Because this is just the first stage, Steve, and we have to let the experts... But we have to let the experts now do their job, and that's to review this material and look at whether or not there are any broader systemic issues in the department. And that final report will contain much of this report, and that will be released at the end of January. But I'm not going to prejudice the work that an expert child death review panel has to do and the work that the Family and Child Commission has to do. Those reports will be released in full. And I want to say, from the beginning I have said I was not going to wait to the final report to act if information came before me that needed immediate action, and that's what I did on Tuesday.
We understand that you've had that internal report for at least a fortnight. Are you still maintaining that you only got it on Tuesday?
Well, I understand the LNP have made claims that I've had this report for a number of weeks. The reality is, Steve, this report was only finalised last Thursday. My Director General...
Did you have a draft report before that?
Absolutely not.
You didn't even have a ministerial briefing document?
No, I was
briefed. You had nothing on your desk before Tuesday about the death of Mason Jet Lee?
No, I had nothing on my desk before Tuesday for this report. This internal systems and practice report was completed late last week. I was given a copy on Tuesday. I was briefed by my Director General on Tuesday, and then action was taken immediately. And I have to say,
did the Director General have the report?
He was given the report on Friday. And I have to say, Steve, these allegations from the LNP are simply more examples of the LNP continuing to play politics with this matter. And playing politics here, Steve, does nothing to improve our child safety system, and it does nothing to keep our kids safe.
The doctors in the hospital, Mason Jet Lee was taken to hospital, and the doctors saw what was happening to this kid. Why did they do nothing?
Well, the doctors made a report to Child Safety, and I understand that the Health Minister and the Department of Health are also reviewing everything that happened with Mason Jet Lee and his family with the Caboolture Hospital and the Department of Health. So the Child and Family Commissioner is looking at all those reviews that are happening across government, and she will make a final report looking at every interaction this family has had with government.
A number of listeners have raised with me that when the young child came from Manus Island with scalds or burns, the doctors at the Mater refused to let that child leave the hospital, and they made a big political issue out of the thing. This kid was being beaten up. Why did those doctors not do the same thing for this kid?
Look, Steve, it is incredibly heartbreaking.
Are you going to ask? You're going to ask the health system?
That review is underway right now. We are absolutely determined to get to the bottom of what happened here. That's why these reviews are taking place.
And that will include the doctors that saw the child?
Absolutely, it will. We have to get to the bottom of what happened here. Mason's legacy has to be a stronger system where agencies share information, and that's what we're doing. We have to get to the bottom of what happened so that this doesn't happen again.
A number of foster carers who are called on by the department to care for kids in danger want some answers. And they seem to be frustrated that they can see, they're experienced parents, and this seems to be a key here. Experienced parents seem to be able to pick the warning signs. And you have a number of them that you use. These wonderful gems of people go, warning, there's a problem in this home. It's usually not the child's father that's, the natural father that's there. But what process does the department go through once someone tells them a child is in danger?
So anyone, a family, a friend, a relative, foster carers, anyone can ring the Department of Child Safety and say they have a concern about the safety or well-being of a child. That is called what we call an intake. That's a phone call or an email that comes in. That's then assessed immediately. And if it is serious enough, it becomes what we call a notification, and then we investigate, and we might spend 2 or 3 months with that particular family investigating every circumstance, and if it is substantiated, if there is risk of harm to the child, then Child Safety makes an order to the court to remove the child. And I do want to say, we have so many fantastic foster and kinship carers in this state. We have over 8,000 children living in out-of-home care. And Steve, the majority are doing incredibly well. And they have foster carers that are providing a wonderful, loving home. And I really value the work that they do and work very closely with Foster Care Queensland to make sure that we are hearing the voices of foster carers and kids in care.
But if one of those foster carers, someone who's in the system, who's that emergency mum and dad, and they ring up and say, this kid's life is in danger, what happens? Does that escalate? It's not just a phone call from Joe Bloggs from out in the public. This is a person who sees that your experienced team draw on to say, we need your help here, and they ring you and say, there's a problem here. You've got to act.
If it's an urgent issue, Steve, we break down any of our concern reports into 24-hour response time frame, 5-day and 10-day. And Queensland is the only jurisdiction that investigates every call that comes in. And so we allocate, depending on how serious or urgent the matter is, whether or not it requires a 24-hour response, 5-day or 10-day response.
I hear what you're saying, but you've just told me at the beginning of the interview that the staff of the Caboolture office didn't do this, obviously.
So, well, that's a matter still to be determined. Okay. And I do want to say...
well, you must have some prima facie evidence, otherwise you wouldn't have stood 3 of them down and sent 12 to ethical standards.
There is enough before me in this report to demonstrate that those legislation and codes of practice were not followed and that serious errors of judgment were made. I also want to say that yesterday I not only made a statement in relation to staff, we are also now splitting the North Coast region of child safety, which is a very big region. We're very high demand, into 2, and we are creating a new child safety office. We are not shutting down the Caboolture Child Safety Service office. We're actually creating a new one. So there will be 2 child safety centres in that region because there is a growing demand. There are lots of new families. There are lots of challenges and complexities.
So it's been under-resourced up until now, is what you're telling me. It's been under-resourced then.
The report highlights that it is a region of growing demand, and despite more resources being put into the Caboolture Child Safety Service Centre this year and the previous year, there are still some demand pressures in that region, and that's why we need better supervision, we need better management, and splitting the region in 2 will give us better line of sight of the work that is happening there.
I understand that there have been another 4 deaths of children that have not been released publicly, and there's no arrest made yet. Can you confirm that?
So every child death that is known, where the child is known to the department, triggers one of these reviews. This has been the practice for many years, Steve. In the previous term of government, in the last 12 months, there were 54 children who died who were known to the department that triggered these reports. So, every time there is a critical incident or a death of a child, one of these internal system and practice reviews occurs, and then it's considered by a panel of experts who look at the individual circumstances of the case, but also look to see if there are broader systemic changes that are needed. That's the process that's underway now, and that's the final report that I have said I will release at the end of January.
I'll ask my question again. I understand that there's another 4 dead children where the details have not been released publicly yet, and no arrests have been made. Can you confirm that?
Steve, I can't confirm that.
So you don't know?
Well, each year we release the annual report of child deaths who are known to the department. A handful of those are suspicious, but I can't give you any more information than that.
When the LNP was in power, after the Carmody inquiry, which was pretty well universally praised, and I think you also told me some time back that you were instigating all of the recommendations of Carmody, that they're pretty much across the board. Everyone saw it was a pretty good process and pretty fair and pretty smart.
Yep.
The LNP, those guys put in $400 million and employed 77 new child safety officers. Now, these are frontline stuff. They're the people who go knock on the door and face the screaming abuse from abusive people and say, we have to take your child. How many have you put on?
So this financial year, 129 new frontline child safety staff. So they are the frontline staff.
The people that knock on the door? Well, I understand that there are people actually working the administration at the back of the building.
There are 129 full-time frontline knock-on-the-door child safety officers.
CSOs. They knock on the front door.
And I want to say 2 things, Steve, about the Commission of Inquiry. In opposition, we provided bipartisan support for those reforms.
You did.
Until recently, we had bipartisan support, but recently the LNP and the Shadow Minister, Ros Bates, has walked away from that bipartisanship, and every stakeholder...
In what way? I spoke to her yesterday, so what did she say that makes you think she walked away?
Well, because this constant playing politics with child safety, all of the stakeholders have come out and said, have urged, in fact, the LNP to stop playing politics with child safety and in fact, David Swain, the CEO of Churches of Christ, came out and said the LNP are blowing up the bipartisan approach to reforming child safety. So that's not my words, Steve. That's the words of one of our biggest stakeholders in child safety. I also want to say the LNP did put $400 million into child safety. You know what, Steve? They ripped out more than they put in, and they sacked 225 full-time staff. So this is a department that has faced extreme pressures, and since I have been the minister, I have been restoring frontline services, putting in place more staff, and we have a record investment in early intervention and prevention services to help families earlier.
What's the problem on the north side of Brisbane in particular? I'm told that North Lakes is a bit of a problem area. Why? It's a new one of those advertised new housing estates that apparently people want to live in. What's the problem there? We
have a lot of families that are struggling, Steve. There are high rates of domestic and family violence. There are high rates of mental illness, and there are high rates of alcohol and substance abuse. So we are seeing more and more interaction with families that not just have one particular complexity, but they have several. And so trying to support those families takes a lot longer, it takes more intensive work, and it takes more work with our service providers to get families the help they need.
Now, you have a range of service providers. I assume that's like Uniting Care, Anglicare and more.
Yes.
Let me ask you, how does Anglicare come into it on the north side? I understand that groups like Anglicare are very good, very well-meaning organisations, but the nature of the demand is that they often employ university graduates who have, appropriate academic qualifications. They're the right people, but they're brought into the system so quickly that their life skills, they're often haven't raised a child of their own, so there's nothing like a mature mother. She's just got a radar. She picks it up, and that these very good, very well-meaning young people often do not have the life skills to go with the university qualification to act when they need to act. Can you speak to that at all?
And yeah, Steve, this is a challenge for our community. So Queensland has historically really underinvested in that family support. So we're only just now rolling out new services and partnering with wonderful organisations like Anglicare, but these are new services. They haven't yet built up the expertise to properly case manage families with increasing complexities.
Was that a factor in the Mason Jet Li case?
Well, that is something that the expert panel, and these are very experienced, mature social workers, people involved in the industry, they will look at this first stage of the report and look at any other material they believe is necessary for them to look at, and they will make findings and recommendations back to me to then implement. And I've committed to implementing all of those recommendations.
Foster carers want to know through us, if they make a complaint to the office or an office of the Department of Child Safety with the child's best interests at heart, and that office then decides to abuse or punish the carer for speaking out, what options does the carer have to appeal decisions or to continue to fight for the child? Because we've spoken to some foster families that were in tears because they feel that they want to go, warning, you're making a mistake. But if they do that, they're stepping out of the bureaucratic line of command, if you like. The foster carers want to say, look, and this sounds like it may have actually happened in the Caboolture office, that people were warning, but the very people they were warning to were the very problem. What do they do in that circumstance?
Firstly, Steve, let me say I think that's completely unacceptable. If a foster carer is making a very important statement to us about the safety of a child, that absolutely needs to be taken into account. So what I would say to foster carers who have experienced that, firstly, I'm sorry that they've experienced that. It is not good enough. They should absolutely...
So what do they do?
They should absolutely get in touch with our complaints department, firstly. They should go to Foster Care Queensland, which is the body set up to advocate for foster carers, and I meet regularly with Foster Care Queensland, and they should certainly contact my office. I'm happy to meet with them.
So if they find that when they're warning about a kid's life is in danger...
and they believe action is not being taken, then they should absolutely contact Foster Care Queensland, our complaints department, and my office. I'm happy to talk to them about it.
Because many of these foster carers are feeling guilty themselves that they didn't do enough.
Well, as I said, Steve, one of the highlights of my job is getting to meet with these wonderful Queenslanders who open their hearts and their homes to some of our most vulnerable children, and I'm more than happy to talk to them any day of the week.
My guest is Minister for Child Safety, Shannon Fentiman. Finally, what's going wrong with the family unit? We've had a massive national discussion about same-sex marriage, but it seems to me that there's a problem in just traditional marriages, in other words, or traditional relationships. Kids should be being protected by their fathers. They should be being provided for by their mothers. And for some reason, it looks like it's increasingly going wrong, not just going wrong, but the task you have looks like it's getting bigger, not smaller. So I'm asking you a vision statement, if you like. What can my listener do, whether or not they're involved in the system? What can they do to aid relationships, marital relationships, de facto relationships? Yeah. What can they do?
This is a huge problem, and we all have a part to play. We run a community campaign that says play your part. And I guess my vision is Queenslanders absolutely step up. This is a community problem and we all play our part. And that can mean making sure that you talk to families that you think might be struggling and let them know that help is available. I think the other thing we've got to do, Steve, is normalise families asking for help. When things do get tough, there are really great services out there, but we still have this stigma about asking for help or saying that parenting's tough or really talking about issues that are facing families.
This family, though, of Mason Jet Li, as I understand it, didn't see anything wrong.
Well, and that's
They're not going to ask for help if they don't see they've got a problem.
Well, that's a community conversation we've got to have. Like we've done with domestic and family violence, we are now talking about this issue. It's come out from behind closed doors. We absolutely need to do the same with child abuse and neglect. We need to be having a community conversation, and we need people to step up, talk to families that are struggling, normalise asking for help, and if you see a child that you believe is in danger, ring child safety.
One final question. Researchers tell me that children whose parents are in a de facto relationship statistically are at a far greater risk. Can you confirm that?
I haven't seen that research, Steve.
You've never seen any research to back that up?
I haven't seen that research, no.
Okay. I'm told that most of the deaths in Queensland have been in families where the relationship is de facto. You can't confirm that either?
I can't. I'm sorry.
All right. So when will all of the final processes so that you can come back on this program and say, this is what we've discovered?
So I'm expected to receive the final report from the Independent Child Death Review Panel at the end of January. The Family and Child Commissioner, who is providing oversight to all the different reviews across government, is due to report back to the Premier at the end of March. So I'm happy to come back and talk to you at the end of January and March and talk about the findings in those reports. And let's hope that Mason's legacy really is a much stronger system.
There's been lots of Mason Jet Lees. There's been lots of them. I'll leave it there. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Steve.
Shannon Fentiman is the Minister for Child Safety in Queensland.
ABC News, now on Facebook.